Thank you for participating. I am here today to talk to you about the amazing transformative power of food. And you might be wondering what does food have to do with art. And I think the best way that I can sum this up is, I heard this expression from the Rastafari religion, where basically this guy said, I think it was a documentary I watched, he said, if you eat bad food, you think bad thoughts. So you could also put it another way, that if you want to liberate your creativity, it's important that we feed our bodies and thus also our minds with something good. So when I was 10 years old, my family moved to a new home just north of Copenhagen in Denmark. And our next door neighbor was this really, really old lady. She was pretty scary, actually. Luckily, she stayed mainly in a house, which meant that I could use her back garden. And her back garden was this place that had been left to its own devices for must have been decades, because it was completely overgrown with vegetation and trees and plants. I mean, there were vines hanging from these trees. I'd never seen anything like it in Denmark. And it was a truly magical little place. I absolutely loved it. I would spend hours upon hours in there. When I came home from school on the weekends, I called it the jungle, because I believe that this must be what the rainforest looks like. And then after about a year or so, this old lady, she died. And then two of her relatives inherited the place. And then one day I came home from school to the sound of chainsaws that were massacring the trees. And in a matter of a couple of days, the whole place had just been razed to the ground. And obviously I was completely devastated, because I was just a little kid, and I just couldn't understand why anyone would destroy a place of such utter beauty and wonder. It left a really deep impression on me, and it certainly has a lot to do with the fact that I'm the tree hugger I am today. So as I grew older, I began to understand that actually it wasn't just my little jungle haven that had been ravaged, that all over the planet, human activities are causing immense destruction on an almost unfathomable scale. And the more I learned about this, the more I understood this, the more fired up I got, because I really wanted to change this. But then at the same time I felt powerless, because what could little me do sitting in Denmark on the other side of the planet about the rainforest being chopped down in the Amazon? And it wasn't actually until I came to London about 6-7 years ago, when I started looking into this in more depth in connection with my studies, that I began to realize that I was partial to this problem. And how's that, you might ask? Well, it's because of the environmental impact of our food choices. So consider for a moment these facts from the United Nations Food and Agricultural Administration. At the moment, rearing livestock, primarily cows, use about 30% of the planet's land surface, 70% of total water use, and it is a leading cause of deforestation and environmental degradation. It takes 15 to 20 kilos of grain to produce 1 kilo of beef, which is insane, because then we're using a ton of land growing feed for animals rather than food for people. And cows don't even like grain, they eat grass, so they actually get really sick when they eat grain, and then we have to give them antibiotics and things to keep them healthy. Or not healthy, but keep them from not dying before they're slaughtered. And then also factory farmed meat produces more climate gases than the entire world's transport sector combined, because when cows in their digestive system produce methane, which is a very powerful climate gas. So if the current meat eating trajectory continues, then we will use the entire greenhouse gas budget by 2050. And I think most people obviously realize that the climate change issue is a pretty big one. But a lot of people might be surprised to find out that actually farming, and particularly meat agriculture, is actually a very, very big problem that we have to address. In addition, we shouldn't forget that overconsumption of highly processed foods, and particularly factory farm meat, is also a leading cause of deadly lifestyle illnesses such as heart disease, diabetes, and certain types of cancers. I would also like to mention that when it comes to fishing, 75% of fish stocks globally are currently fished at unsustainable levels, which owes in large part to the fact that we're only eating a very narrow array of species, and then fish like herring, anchovies, sardines, they're used to feed farm fish like salmon. It takes 5 kilos of wild fish to make 1 kilo of farm salmon. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking a lot of food and turning it into a very small amount of food in a world where we still have a lot of people that are suffering from hunger. So in realizing these facts, I understood to my amazement that I actually had the power to affect positive change for the environment. But of course, when we go for lunch or dinner or breakfast, saving the planet is not really what we're thinking about. We first and foremost eat to nourish ourselves. So I was blessed to grow up in a family that cooked. We would gather around the dinner table pretty much every single day, and we would just eat nice food. I don't recall anyone in my family ever talking about diets or eating healthy or anything. It was basically just something that we did. And when I was about 12, 13 years old, I began cooking myself, and I've been doing so ever since. I'm absolutely hooked on food. I love eating it, and I love cooking it. So, what exactly does it mean to eat healthy? I'm sure, like a lot of people, that the relentless barrage of healthy eating information has left many people quite confused about this concept. And certainly, social media hasn't made it any better. Instagram accounts, influential clean eating bloggers, and so on, that offer up these glorified ideals, very elitist ideals of what it means to eat healthy. They vilify entire food groups, and they promote a view on healthy food which is unattainable to most people because we have tight budgets, we live busy lives, we have a family to take care of maybe. And actually the stress that comes with trying to live up to these ideals is supremely unhealthy. There's now even a diagnosis for the extreme and unhealthy pursuit of healthy eating, which is called orthorexia. So the good news that I'm going to relate to here today is that you don't need diet fads, clean eating and wellness to be healthy. I guarantee you this. You don't need to have a soul cycle and sip cold pressed green juices or shop at Whole Foods either, because obsession is not the answer. Eating healthy, to me, is much more about having a healthy relationship with food. And having a healthy relationship with food starts with the notion that food should be something that we enjoy. Because food is joy and food is fun. But not if we let ourselves succumb to the constant weights and measures guilt trip that comes with trying to live up to food fads, isms, and unhealthy restrictive obsession. Again, for me, it's really about, it's all about balance, So, of course, eating healthy means that we eat lots of plants, we minimize the amount of processed foods we eat, and we avoid eating factory farmed animals. That said, eat cake, pasta, all these different things, as long as things happen in balance. And actually, if you think about it this way, if you have cake and stuff and chocolate and pasta, then it's a lot easier to stick with eating lots of plants the other half of the time. Because again, balance is the answer, not obsession. Essentially, this is why something like the Mediterranean traditional diet has been heralded for being so good for us, because it has that natural balance between all the different food groups. Interestingly, there are also recent studies that show that part of why the Mediterranean diet is so healthy is also because people tend to eat together, which is really great for has great psychological benefits. And I just wanted to mention this because I think a lot of us in our fast-paced lives now say, oh, well, I don't have time to eat, we don't have time to cook, we don't have time to eat together, which is quite funny because I read a recent statistics that the average person in the UK spends 12 hours a week watching Netflix. So rather than being too busy, one could argue that this is really a matter of what we choose to prioritize. And when it comes to meat, which as you can tell is kind of at the center of this talk, there's ample scientific evidence as well to suggest that we're eating way too much of it for our own good. Yet eating animals is so deeply ingrained in our food cultures all around the world, so how exactly are we going to approach this? So I believe that it has to start with respecting the individual choice, and it has to start with a respect for cultures and traditions. Meat consumption currently is increasing very rapidly in the developing world. It's also still increasing in the developed world, though at a lower rate. But actually, this current westernized mass consumption of meat is actually a quite recent phenomenon, which emerged in the wake of the Second World War and industrialized farming practices, which made subsidized mountains of cheap corn and soybeans available to raise animals on unnatural diets, like cows, for instance, eating soybeans, which made all this really crappy quality meat incredibly cheap. So back in 2007, I was living in Beijing, in China, in connection with studying Mandarin with a Chinese family, and the parents of this family were like in their early 60s. You know, so they had seen, you could tell that they had seen real hardship. They placed a value on food, like the way they spoke about it and handled it and everything. Just you could tell that they had actually really understood what it meant to not have any food at all. And I spent a lot of time in the kitchen and on the market with my Chinese auntie, my Ai. And I was really struck with, particularly with the way that she would cook with meat. You know, so she would go to the market, she'd buy like a 200-gram piece of chicken or pork, and I would stretch the whole week for 4 people. And the way she did this is she'd use a little bit of meat along with like soy sauce, which is also a source of the 5th flavor, umami, in a dish that was essentially vegetables. So meat would give the flavor, and then vegetables would be the bulk. And then I started looking into this more and realized that actually all about like 50, 100, 200 years ago, this was how all of our cooking was put together, you know, because people couldn't afford to eat meat, so we would either not eat it or we would use less of it to give flavor to dishes rather than being the bulk. So basically, coming back to this idea of starting a global mainstream movement aimed at bringing meat consumption down to levels that are not killing our own bodies and that won't kill the planet. And in order to do so, we need an approach that respects traditions where eating meat or not eating meat isn't presented as a binary choice. We need a middle way that the broad majority can get on board with and which includes rather than alienating and judging. So the problem, I think, with diet fads and isms is that they put everything in boxes and everything gets labeled. And then people in a certain box will have a tendency to point fingers at people in another box, which means that then food choices lead to division and sometimes even conflict. And seeing as eating animals is something that humans have evolved to do as hunter-gatherers, seeing as it is so deeply ingrained in our food traditions and our cultures, we simply have to respect each other's choices, each other's traditions, and this has to be where this movement starts. And of course that respect has to go both ways. If we want to have a meaningful dialogue where eating meat and not eating meat is not a black and white thing. So if you choose to be a vegan, you know, that's absolutely fantastic. And if you choose to eat meat, you know, you shouldn't be judged for making that choice. But for the benefit of your own health and to be sure for greater enjoyment and for the sake of the planet, all I encourage you to do is eat less but better quality meat from animals that have been treated with respect. So the Bear Kitchen, what is that? Well, the Bear Kitchen is about what matters most, which is the food choices that we make in our daily lives on a daily basis. Our core belief is that every meal should be a healthful joy rather than a weights and measures guilt trip. And so with a little help from a furry friend in nature, we imagine an alternative, a simple philosophy: eat like a bear. And then you might be asking yourself, with bears, you know, what can I learn from a bear about healthy eating? Isn't it just like honey and salmon? And that's partially true, but actually, depending on the locality, bears will eat up to 90% of their calories in plants. They eat fish and a little bit of meat, and maybe the occasional hiker, if he happens to be in the area. But they actually eat a very well-balanced diet. The important thing is that bears do not eat all the highly processed foods and factory farmed animals that are wreaking terrible havoc on our health and the planet that we share. So the eat like a bear philosophy is not about diets, deprivations, or turning entire food groups into enemies. Food, again, is joy. But of course we do fully respect individual choices, and that's why our plant-powered cooking uses meat and fish and other animal ingredients as optional add-ons. So all of our cooking is plant-based. And that means that basically everybody's welcome, because our aim is to unite people around the pleasure of eating well. So, in our busy everyday lives, it is actually quite easy to forget just how powerful food is. Food has the power to bring us together as families and friends, communities, and food is a common cultural language that transcends borders and has deep roots in our nation's traditions and shared consciousness. Food has the power to bring pleasure and joy, and breaking bread, meeting over a meal historically has also had the power to settle disputes and bring peace. Food has the power to nourish us and keep us healthy, and there's even more to the power of food. Because aside from the air that we breathe, food is the closest connection most of us have with nature in our daily lives. And the choices that we make about what we eat wield immense power over the ecosystems on which we all depend. Because it is not an industry that feeds us, it is nature. And by making more conscious food choices, we can positively contribute not just to our own health, but we can also do something about the greedy corporations that are exchanging short-term profits at the expense of long-term sustainability and your health. Einstein famously said, "Nothing will benefit health or increase chances of survival on Earth as the evolution towards a vegetarian diet." And I think the operative word here is evolution. Because as we start to reduce our meat consumption and become more conscious about the kinds of meat that we eat and how the animals are part of the wider agricultural context that bring fertility back to the soil, then we start to realize, as I did, that you can enjoy your food just as much, if not more, by eating less but better quality meat or none at all, depending on what your personal preference is. And ultimately, we want to establish the Berry Kitchen as a community food hub where we make down-to-earth, affordable, everyday food for a variety of different occasions. Could be something with the Art of the Silent, for instance. And as a place of learning via workshops and events that bring people together and help raise awareness about the importance of making better food choices and empowering people to do so. Because if we are to save the planet and everyone on it and ensure that there is natural beauty and abundance for our children and their children's children, we need everyone, everywhere, to get on board. And to me, it does not matter whether you do a little or you do a lot. The important thing is that we do something, that we each participate, and that we realize that we are very powerful indeed purely by making better food choices. My promise to you is that by eating like a bear, not only will you enjoy your eating just as much, if not more, but your risk of lifestyle illnesses will be significantly reduced, and you will help make a positive difference for the planet and everyone on it. Our vision at the Bear Kitchen is that of a future where all life is thriving, and where the connection between humanity and nature and the balance within us and between us has been restored. So believe me when I say that together we really can change the world by changing the way we eat. Thank you very much for participating.